Alright everybody, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to help you review the principles of the US Constitution. So let's do it. Alright, well, what better place to begin than at the beginning? And so let's start with the preamble to the Constitution. You know those really famous words, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." So one of the reasons that that's a good place to start is that we get some ideas about what the framers thought was the purpose of government. And so in AP Gov, we have 5 really basic kind of fundamental principles that we like to talk about. We like to talk about natural rights, popular sovereignty, the social contract, republicanism, and limited government. Now, these ideas aren't just reflected in the preamble in the Constitution, they're also reflected in the words of the Declaration of Independence, another required document for this class, and another one that has very famous passages that we're probably familiar with. So we think of the Declaration, and you might think of the phrase that says that all men are created equal, that they have been endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, these are very lofty ideals, and one of the main themes of AP Gov is, well, the progression of that. Who's included in the "we the people" from the Constitution? Who's included in the "all men created equal"? Whose rights are actually being protected? And we see that expansion of those rights over time as we see different groups rise up and claim inclusion in those words. But I'm starting to get ahead of myself because some of that doesn't come until later in the course. So for now, let's go back to those main fundamental principles. So let's start with limited government. Limited government is exactly what it sounds like. Government has certain powers, but those powers are limited. They're restricted. There is a limit to the things that government is allowed to do. And remember, the Constitution specifically is limiting the power of the federal government. Now, we mentioned the Declaration of Independence, and that idea is definitely within the Declaration, but so are the ideas of natural rights, popular sovereignty, and the social contract. Those are strongly, prominently featured in the Declaration. Natural rights is the idea that there are certain fundamental rights that all humans have, simply by virtue of being, of existing. We don't need to receive those from any government, and that's what Jefferson called those inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's his version of natural rights. Popular sovereignty is the idea that people are the source of governmental power, not the other way around. So the people in government, they owe their jobs to the public, to the citizenry. The citizens give them whatever powers they're allowed to have and no more. And social contract tells us the purpose of government. It's the idea that people come together and create a government in order to make sure that their own individual rights are being protected. And the last fundamental principle is republicanism. This is the idea that the United States is a representative form of government, where when we talk about federal policy, people don't directly vote on those policies, but rather they vote for a person, send that person to Congress, for example, to be part of the government to then make those policies. So we have a Republican form of government. And that's a lowercase r, by the way, so we're talking about the idea of a republic, not the political party. Same way as when we talk about the United States becoming more democratic, lowercase d, we're not talking about the party, we're talking about the idea of democracy, which is that people have power in government. Now, speaking of democracy, while it's true we don't have direct democracy at the federal level, people do still have ways to influence policy. And in fact, we talk about 3 models of democracy in AP Gov. We talk about elite democracy, participatory democracy, and pluralist democracy. Now, elite democracy emphasizes the idea of only a limited role for the citizens. So have some kind of filter, some kind of barrier between the people and the policies being made. Allow the people to have some influence, but not too much. So this one isn't so trustful of the people and the decisions that they'll make. So think of things like the Electoral College, and again, the fact that we have a republic where people don't vote on the policies, but rather vote for other people who will then actually make the policies for them. In participatory democracy, this would have a much larger role for the people. This is where the citizens should be directly involved in trying to influence policy making, getting involved marching, holding rallies, contacting representatives, emphasizing the broad role for the everyday citizen to try to influence policymaking. And pluralist democracy emphasizes the role of groups in policymaking. So today we might think of things like political parties and of interest groups. Back then, James Madison talked about factions. So it's this idea of competing groups that they will battle it out and will have policy made as a result of negotiation and compromise between those groups. Now, you may have noticed we haven't talked about the Articles of Confederation yet, so let's do that right now. Now, we know that the Articles, that was the first framework for the U.S. federal government that happened after the Declaration and before the Constitution that we're used to today. So, what happened? Well, as you probably know, the Articles of Confederation are typically thought of as a failure, that they didn't give enough power to the federal government. For example, it only created one branch of government, a legislative branch, and it only gave Congress very specific powers that were expressly delegated to Congress. And Congress couldn't do anything that was not directly expressed, written in the Articles of Confederation. So it did have some power, especially over foreign policy, so it could do things like declare war. It could also make treaties to make peace. It could coin money, it could borrow money. So there are some things that it could do, but there were some significant things it couldn't do. Probably the most significant is that it could not tax. So it had to ask the states for money, and that put it in a perpetual state of weakness. It also couldn't regulate interstate commerce, and as we'll see in the next video, that power that the Constitution does give to Congress is going to be a really big deal. So the absence of that power under the Articles was also a big deal because it really emphasizes the weakness. Well, if we fast forward a few years, we get to Shays' Rebellion. And this isn't a push, so we don't really get into the whole story of what happened and why were people rebelling. What we care about is the fact that there was this rebellion and that the federal response was, well, kind of lacking. And that this served as a turning point where public opinion began to shift towards possibly being open towards a new constitution, or at least towards empowering the federal government a little bit more. Now, let's not exaggerate this and go crazy and say that everybody wanted a new constitution, because that's not true. If we come to the Constitutional Convention, we know that there was a lot of disagreement. One state didn't even show up. That's to show the level of disagreement here. And then we'll have the battles between the Federalists and the Anti-federalists, which we'll get to in just a moment. But sticking with the Constitutional Convention, what the AP Gov exam wants to focus on is this idea of negotiation and compromise at the Constitutional Convention. So we have several examples of this. So we can start with something known as the Great Compromise. And this was the solution to the debate between the small states and the large states, specifically about representation in Congress. So will it be based off of population, benefiting the large states? Will it be equal, which would benefit the small states? Well, the Great Compromise says we will have a bicameral legislature, two houses, one of which will be based on population, the House of Representatives. The other will be equal, and that's the Senate. Each state has 2 members in the Senate. Now, one concession the large states got so that they went along with this was that all tax and revenue bills have to originate in the House. And that's the chamber of Congress where they are better represented. We also have the Electoral College, where some people wanted Congress to directly choose the president. Others wanted voters to get to choose the president. So they do something that neither side wanted, which is they create this Electoral College where people can vote for other people who then those people will vote for the president. Don't worry, there'll be a lot more information about that in the video about elections. Additionally, you have the 3/5 Compromise, no doubt one of the most infamous sections of the U.S. Constitution. The southern states wanted slaves to count for purposes of population so that they would gain extra representation in Congress. Northern states didn't think that that was fair, and they said no, slaves shouldn't count at all. They compromised in the middle, where for each 5 slaves, they counted as 3 persons for the purpose of congressional representation. There was also the ban on the importation of slaves, so they agreed that they wouldn't ban the slave trade, but they also wouldn't expressly endorse it. It basically said the federal government would be allowed to get rid of it 20 years after the ratification of the Constitution. And lastly, you have the amendment process, which is kind of an acknowledgement that things were going to change and that things would need to be updated. And so they set out this process where it'd start with Congress, where 2/3 of both houses of Congress could propose a constitutional amendment, which would then be subject to ratification by 3/4 of the states. So those are a few of your key examples of negotiation and compromise at the Constitutional Convention. So now the convention is over, and you have the 2 sides formed: the Federalists, who support the Constitution, and the Anti-federalists, who oppose ratification of the Constitution. So we know that the Federalists supported the new Constitution because they thought that we needed a stronger central government. And we know that the Anti-federalists opposed the Constitution. They supported states' rights. They wanted a weaker national government because they believed that people had more local control of policies and that would be a good thing at the state level. So we have a couple more required documents here. Federalist number 10 argues in favor of, again, the national government. It says that a large republic is the best way to control the negative effects of factions. Madison argues that the states are a little bit too democratic and that they will end up just devouring the rights of the minority and that they will be turbulent and things just won't go well in that regard. So we need a large Republican form of government, and that'll better protect minority rights and solve this really tough problem about factions. Brutus number 1, now in this document, he warns strongly against ratifying the Constitution. He points out some clauses that we're going to talk about in the next video about federalism. He's like, listen, this supremacy clause, the necessary and proper clause, the power to tax, all of these things are going to lead the national government to totally obliterate the states. They're going to oppress the states. They're going to take away the rights of states. This isn't something that you want. So he argues fiercely against the Constitution. Back to the Federalist Papers, Federalist number 51 argues in favor of something known as checks and balances and separation of powers, which takes us nicely to that concept. Now we're talking about how the federal government is formed. So we have separation of powers, the idea that each branch gets some power and other branches have the other powers. So we kind of take the powers, divide them up among the 3 branches. So we have a legislative branch, but unlike the Articles, it's not just that branch. We also now have an executive and a judicial branch, each one with certain powers. Now, checks and balances builds on this and says, okay, they each have their own jobs, but they also have certain ways that they can influence and limit the other branches. If we briefly go through the Articles of the Constitution, Article 1 dealt with the legislative branch. Article 2 was all about the executive branch. Article 3, you guessed it, is about the judicial branch. And we'll talk about more of those in the videos about Congress, the presidency, and the judiciary, of course. Article 4 had to do with interstate relationships and responsibilities. So here we have things like the full faith and credit clause that says that each state has to honor the legal decisions of other states. This is why if you're married in the state of Florida and you move to Georgia or Hawaii or somewhere else, you don't have to get remarried again because the state has to honor the legal decision of the other state. It also has the privileges and immunities clause, which says basically that states can't discriminate against people from other states. And it also has the rules to extradition, saying that if your criminal gets caught in Idaho and that person was from Michigan, then Idaho's government will send them back to Michigan where they can be held on trial. Article 5 gives us the amendment process, which we discussed earlier. Article 6 has a really important idea about federal supremacy, and that will be in the next video about federalism. And then Article 7, that's just the how to ratify the Constitution. And we certainly don't want to forget what came next. So that was the original Constitution, but then the Anti-Federalists do win the day when it comes to at least one thing. They demanded a Bill of Rights. And so we do end up with the Bill of Rights. Those are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution passed as one block. And what these do really is they limit governmental power. Specifically, they limit the federal government's ability to infringe on individual rights, civil liberties. But we're going to stop there for this video. Be sure to check out the next video about federalism, where we'll go into some more detail on this. And this is the first video in a new series that goes through the entire course. It's a little bit quicker than the videos that go through every single concept individually, but it's a little bit more detailed than the unit review videos. So this is kind of the in-between the watching every single video and the only watching the really quick review videos. So you have a little bit more knowledge. So hopefully you like this. If you did, make sure to watch this series, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. All right, now something new in these videos, you might see that on the screen right now are some multiple choice questions. So pause the video for each of those. There's a few of them. Pause the video so you can take a moment and answer those. Put your answer down in the comments below. Check the description and you'll find the answers there. All right, so until next time, this has been a LaMoney production. Thanks again for watching this video. Do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure to check out the Ultimate Review Packet. The link is in the description below. Unit 1, you can preview for free right now today. It has tons of great things, study guides, exclusive practice questions, 2 brand new multiple choice and FRQ tests, everything you need to practice for the AP exam. So I'll see you over there.